VLOOKUP function has been available in Excel for over 34 years, and it is still very useful. But in some situations, simple relationships can replace hundreds of thousands of VLOOKUP functions and reduce the file size considerably. Relationships are the backdoor for accessing Power Pivot functionality and indirectly create a data model. I am Nabil Murad. In this tutorial, I build a simple report twice, using VLOOKUP functions, then using relationships to replace over 250,000 VLOOKUPs and dramatically reduce the file size. Along the way, I will invoke simple DAX functions without even enabling the Power Pivot tab on the ribbon. So let's build our project twice in Excel. Here is my stat file. You can download the exercise file and follow along by clicking on the link below this video. In this worksheet, I have three lists. In the first list, I have a date column, a product, units, and code. In the second list, I have the same code that I see in the first list, which is the code of a province. Then I have a column for the province, and then I have a column for the region. While in the third list, I have a column for the product, which matches the product in column B, and then I have a column for the code, a retail price, and a category. What I would like to do is to create a report which shows the revenue returned by our sales for each category in each province. But I have a problem. While in the first list I have the units, but I don't have the retail price. In order to calculate the revenue, I need to create a VLOOKUP function that looks at the product and accordingly extracts the retail price. Once I do this, I can create an extra column that multiplies the unit by the retail price to get the revenue. And the same applies for the province. I don't have a column for the province. I need to create a VLOOKUP function that looks at the code in column D and then matches the code in column F and accordingly extract the province. And finally the same for the category. I look at the product in column B and extract the category from column M. And I want to create this project twice. I'll be creating it first by using VLOOKUP functions, and then I'll be creating it by using relationships. So let's go to the classic worksheet, and I have the same exact setup in the classic worksheet, and because I want to create 4 new columns, then I'm going to select 4 columns, and then I hit the shortcut Ctrl+ to insert 4 columns. Then I'm going to type some headers here. I'm going to type province, and then I hit tab. I want the retail, and then I hit tab. I want the category, and then I hit tab, and finally I want a column for the revenue. I adjust the column width, so I select the 4 new columns and double click on the border, and then I start creating my VLOOKUP function. The VLOOKUP function will look at the code, and then we'll go to the second list and find the matching code in this list of unique values in the leftmost column. So I'm going to do that by typing equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. My lookup value is the code, and then I hit comma. My table array is this entire table, and then I hit F4 to lock it, and then I hit comma. I need a return value for the province, which is column 2, and then comma. It's an exact match, so I type 0 for exact match, and then I hit OK, and I would have extracted the province. For the retail and category, I'm going to extract them together because they are in the same order here, and I type equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? My lookup value is the product. It's the lookup column of the third list, but because I'm going to copy to the right, then I want to lock the column letter, so I hit F4 3 times, and then I hit comma. Where is your table array? My table array will be this entire list. I select all the list, and then Shift Control down arrow, and then F4 to lock it and jump back. Now I hit comma. What's the column index number? For the retail, I need column 3. For the category, I need column 4. So I'm going to create a match function match, and then I hit tab. What would you like to match? I want to match the column header, and because I'm going to copy down, then I need to lock the row by hitting F4 twice, once and twice, and then I hit comma. Where is your lookup array? My lookup array is this top row, and I lock it in all directions by hitting F4, and then I hit comma. I'm looking at an exact match, so I type 0 and I close the bracket for the match function. If you want to test this part, the match function, the column index number, I click in the column index number in the screen tip, and if I hit F9, it will be returning 3. So I hit Control Z. I was just testing. One more argument for the VLOOKUP function. I hit comma. This is an exact match, so I select false, and then I hit tab, and then I close the bracket, and then Control Enter. Now I want to calculate the revenue, so I'll be typing an equal sign, and the revenue is the product of the units and the retail. So I'll be typing equal units multiplied by the retail price, and then I hit enter. I created 4 functions, and this list includes almost 70,000 rows. So I'm going to copy the 4 functions down. So I double click and send it down, and I'll be creating over 250,000 functions. Let's double click and send it down. It's taking a long time to calculate. That's because it's a huge number of functions. Now that I have done this and I brought all the information into one single list, I can go ahead and analyze my data and create my desired report by creating a pivot table. And to create a pivot table, I can go to the Insert tab and then click on Pivot Table, or I can use the shortcut Alt and V. I want to create my pivot table in a new worksheet. So I hit OK, and here is the pivot table placeholder, and this is the pivot table field list. What you see here are the field names from the list, so I can simply drag the category to the rows, and then I can drag the revenue to the values, and immediately I created my pivot table. Let's improve the appearance, because here the number formatting should be done inside the pivot table. I select any single cell, and then I right click, and I use the number format option. A variation of the format cell dialog box opens. I'll be selecting accounting. I don't want any decimals, and then I hit OK. I created the sum of revenue. I want to bring a label here at the top, and I do that by clicking on the Design tab, and then I change the report layout and make it a tabular layout, and I would have created my pivot table. I want to create a pivot chart as well, so I hit Alt F1 to create the default column pivot chart. I'm not going to spend a long time formatting my pivot chart. I just want to get rid of the field buttons, so I right click on one of the field buttons and I select hide all field buttons on chart. I don't want the legend as well, so I select it and hit delete. I can also format the vertical axis, so if I hit Control 1, it opens the format axis panes. I want to represent these numbers in thousands. I close the format axis and I close the pivot table field list. Now the final thing for my report, I want to insert one more row because I want to bring a slicer, and this slicer will be for the different cities because I want to show the revenue generated for each category of products for each province. A slicer is a graphic interactive filter. So if I click on the Analyze tab, I click on Insert Slicer, I'll be selecting province, and then I hit OK. My slicer has been created. I can position it here at the top. I'm going to resize it. I want to split it into multiple columns, so I increase the number of columns to 5. I don't want to see the header, so I right click and select Slicer Settings, and in the Slicer Settings dialog box I take the check away from Display Header, and then I hit OK. Now I can even resize my slicer. If I test, now I want to see the sales in Ontario, I want to see the sales in British Columbia, I want to see the sales in Nova Scotia, and so on, and I was able to create my report. But I had to create a huge number of functions. Now, let's see the other method of creating relationships. So if I click on the source data, and here I have the same exact list one more time. I want to create a relationship between the first list and the second one. What's the matching field? It's the code field. Here I have a unique list of codes. For each code in the second list, in column F, I have multiple corresponding transactions. And you have to think of the relationship as a VLOOKUP function. One unique value has multiple matches in the original list. In the third list, I have a unique list of products, and for each one of these products, I have multiple matches in the sales table. This is called my lookup table or dimension table, while the first one is called my fact table having the different transactions. As I said, you have to think of relationships exactly like a VLOOKUP function. One match in the lookup table has multiple matches in the fact table. You have to know that creating relationships is the back door for accessing the data model functionality. I want to draw your attention that I don't have the Power Pivot tab displayed on the ribbon. But if you are using Office 2013 or later, then the Power Pivot functionality is already included, even if you don't display the Power Pivot tab. I want to go to the Data tab of the ribbon and show you that relationships are not active, and it will become active the moment I convert the three lists into tables. Let's start by converting the three lists into tables. I select the first one and I hit Control T followed by Enter. And now I'm going to change the name and I'm going to call it the Sales T, and then I hit Enter. I click on the second one, Control T, and then I hit Enter, and I'll be naming it Province T, and then I hit Enter. I select the last one, Control T, and then I hit Enter, and that will be the product table, and I hit Enter. If I go one more time to the Data tab, now look at that, relationships became active. And I'm going to create two relationships. I'll be creating a relationship between the sales table and the province, and I'll be creating another relationship between the sales table and the product table. Once I create the relationship, that means I'll be able, through the relationship, to extract related information from other tables. Let's see how we do that. I click on relationships, and here I don't have any relationships yet. I click on new, and I want to create a relationship. I have to select the table and the column that I'll be using, and then the related table and the matching column. So if I click on the down pointing arrow for the table, I want to draw your attention to the name. It says Worksheet Table Product, Worksheet Table Province, and Worksheet Table Sales. That's going to change in a minute, and then which field will be used for connecting the tables. So from here, I select the code field. What's the matching table? I select the province table, and from here I'll be selecting the matching field in column F, which is the code. This is a unique identifier. In database terminology, we call it the primary key. And this is the matching field in column D. We call it a foreign key. Now I'm going to hit OK, and the first relationship has been created. I want to create a second relationship between the sales table and the products table this time. When I click on New, and as I said, I don't have the Power Pivot tab displayed, but just by creating the relationship, it's invoking the Power Pivot functionality. So if I click one more time on the drop list, look at the name it changed. It becomes Data Model Province, Data Model Table Sales. I select this one, and I want to use the product field. I click on the related table. I select a related table, and because this one hasn't been used yet, so it has not been added to the data model, so I select Worksheet Table Product, and the primary key here, the unique identifier, the lookup field, will be the product field. When I hit OK, I would have created the second relationship. I'm not going to show you what's happening in the Power Pivot window right now. I just want to continue without the need of creating VLOOKUPs, because the purpose is to compare using VLOOKUPs in this situation or just using relationships and saving hundreds of thousands of formulas and functions. I'm going to hit close and I select any single cell and I want to create a pivot table. I'll be using the shortcut Alt and V, and look at that. The same create pivot table wizard pops up. And the only option it says, would you like to create a pivot table by using the data in your data model? Of course, this is what I want to do. Then I select I want to dump it in a new worksheet. So I select new worksheet and then I hit OK. It works from this point onward as if it was a regular pivot table, but I have a little difference. Look at the fields here. This is called a Power Pivot field list because these are not regular fields. These are Power Pivot fields. These are the tables. So I have the product table, the province table, and the sales table, and I know it's a table from the blue line that appears at the top of each icon. And to the left side, we have a collapse and an expand symbol, a right pointing triangle. So if I click on any one of these, I see the individual fields. So creating a Power Pivot pivot table will be using fields from the different sources. And now I want to drag the category field exactly as I did in the previous report. So I drag the category and I drop it in the rows area. Automatically, Excel is creating a unique list of categories. In the previous method, I created a VLOOKUP function that extracted the retail price in a separate column. And then I created an extra column for the revenue, in which I multiplied the units by the retail. So I created the revenue, and I was able to drag it to the values area to calculate the revenue for each category. That's called an implicit measure. But because I'm using the Power Pivot functionality, although I'm not displaying the Power Pivot tab, then I need to create a DAX function that performs the following. It will be calculating the revenue, which is the product of the units and the retail price, and then it will be adding up an entire column. So by calculating one single measure, I'll be replacing hundreds of thousands of classic formulas. So let's see how we do that. If I was in the data model in Power Pivot, I could create the DAX function in the calculation area, as I'm going to show you later. But here, I'm going to right-click on the name of the table where I want to create the measure, and I select Add Measure. The Measure dialog box opens, and this measure lives in the sales table, and I need to give it a name. I want to calculate the revenue, so I type revenue. I can give it a description, but I'm going directly to create the sum function that sums the product of the retail price for the unit for each row of the 70,000 rows. What I want to do is to multiply for each row the units by the matching retail price, and then the result of this multiplication should be added up. So I need to use a sum function. So I type equals sum. Look what it says here. It says add all the numbers in a column, but I'm not adding numbers in a column. I'm adding numbers resulting from a multiplication between two columns for each individual row. So I do not use the sum function, I use the sumx function. And let's read the screen tip. What does it say? It returns the sum of an expression evaluated for each row in a table. This is our first example of a DAX function. DAX functions are extremely powerful. They calculate over big data. They have more options, more calculations than in standard pivot table. You create a formula once and then reuse it in many reports, and finally you format it once and then you can reuse it without the need of reformatting it anymore. Let's see how we do that. Now I'm going to select the sumx function and let's look at the screen tip. It requires the name of the table where the measure will be created. My table is the sales table. So I click here and then I type sales and then I hit the tab key to add the sales table. Then I hit comma. The second argument of the sumx function is the expression, and that's a database term. Expression is the equivalent of calculation. My expression, my calculation, is to multiply for each row the units by the retail price. And because I'm creating a DAX function, I have to select the table name and the field name included in square bracket. What's the name of the table in which I have the units? It's the sales table. So if I type sales, I don't have to continue typing. I can simply double click on sales units and I would have added the sales T table and the units in square bracket. I multiply, I add a multiplication symbol, and now I want to bring for each row the related price. And to extract the related price, I'm going to use another DAX function, one of the very popular DAX function that will be extracting the related price from another table. What's the name of this function? Related. So I type related and then I hit tab. Automatically the field list pops up and it's showing me the fields coming from the tables related to the sales table. So from the product table, I want the product retail price. The first part is the name of the table, and in square bracket, you have the name of the field. Now I can close the bracket for the related function. I can close the bracket for the SUMX function. I have a button here for testing my function to check it for error, and sure enough, the function is correct. I'm going to format by explicit measure. And the reason I'm formatting it, even if I use it so many times, I don't need to format it anymore because the formatting will be inherited. I select currency and then I hit OK, and I would have created my measure. The measure appears in the Power Pivot field list under the table where I created it. Here it has the FX icon, so I drag the revenue and I drop it in the values area, and look at that, it comes with the formatting. Now let's continue building our project as we did before. Now I want to create the same exact report. I'll be adding 2 extra rows for my slicer, Control plus to add the rows. I want to bring the column header, so I click on the Design tab, Report Layout, and Show in Tabular Form. And then I want to create a pivot chart, a column pivot chart, Alt F1 to create the pivot chart. And I'm going to position it to the side of my pivot table. I can format the axis, Control 1 to format the axis. I want to format the numbers in thousands. And then I close the Format Axis pane. I close the Power Pivot Chart field. I don't want these horizontal grid lines, so I select one of them and then I hit Delete. I don't want a legend, so I hit Delete. I don't want these field buttons, so I right-click on one of them and I select Hide All Field Buttons. I want to make my pivot chart bigger, so I select the primary axis and I delete it. The reason I formatted it, although I intended to delete it, because I'll be adding data labels and these data labels will inherit the formatting. So if I select outside and now my data labels inherited the formatting from the primary axis. The next thing I want to do is to reduce the gap. So I select one of the columns, one of the series. I hit Control 1 and I have a gap slider. So if I drag it a little bit to the left, I'll be reducing the gap. I can create a nice title and do all the nice things we do in charts, but that's not the focus of this tutorial. I want to go ahead and create a slicer. So I select any single cell and I go to the Analyze tab, click on Insert Slicer. My slicer will be the province. I don't see it here because this is the active tab, but if I go to the All tab and I check the province and then I hit OK, I would have created my slicer. Let's do some changes to the slicer. I'll position it here at the top and then I want to resize it. I want to increase the number of columns to 5. So I have 5 columns. I don't want to see the header, so I right click, Slicer Settings, and in the Slicer Settings dialog box, I take the check away from Display Header and then I hit OK. Then I have my slicer. I can apply a style. So let's say I select one of the dark styles. I can even get rid of this outer border by creating a special style. So I right click on the style that I just applied and I select duplicate. And then here I have to give it a name. So I'm going to give it my name and I hit format. And then for the border, I don't want a border. And then I hit OK. And then I hit another OK. Now the style has been created, but I didn't apply it yet. So if I click on the down arrow, I will find the style here at the top. I select the one that I just created, Nabil Murad, and I apply it, and look at that. My slicer appears here at the top. I can even resize it a little bit more to get rid of the vertical scroll bar, and all the options appear as separate buttons. I can test my slicer. If you want to see the sales by category for the province of Alberta, I click here. If I want to see for Ontario, if I want to see for 2-3 provinces simultaneously, then everything looks nice and works dynamically. I close the format shape, and now I want to go to the View tab and take the check away from the grid line, and this will be my simple report. I created it simply by using relationships without the need of creating VLOOKUP functions. One more thing I want to show you, although I don't have the Power Pivot tab, but if I go to the Data tab of the ribbon, and then I click on Manage Data Model by creating the relationships, I would have sent the 3 tables to the data model, and I would have created the relationships in the data model. Let's have a look at the Power Pivot window by clicking on Manage Data Model. The Power Pivot window opens on top of Excel, and here I see the 3 tables: sales table, province table, and product table. If I look at the sales table, I can expand the column if I wish. And look at this little icon. That means that this column had a relationship with another table. Remember, we created 2 relationships. We created a relationship between the code and the province table, and we created a relationship between the product and the products table. Here are the other tables, the province table, and for the code in the province table, you will see the same icon. If I go to the product table and I expand for the product column, you see the same icon. The Power Pivot window has a ribbon functionality. I'm not discussing that in this tutorial, but this is called the data view. We have another view called the diagram view. So if I go to the diagram view, I can look at the different relationships that we created. In diagram view, I see the different tables. I'm going to reposition the tables and resize them just to build the logic. It has nothing to do with the functionality. And now look at the relationship. Remember, this is my fact table. This is my transaction table, the sales table. We call it the fact table. And these 2 tables used to slice and dice the transactions in the sales table. These are called dimension table or lookup tables. So if I click on the relationship, for every single product in the product table, I have lots of transactions in the sales table, and this type of relationship is called one-to-many. And if I click on the relationship between the 2 other tables, for each code in the province table, I have multiple sales transactions in the sales table. If I want to go back to the data view, I click on data view, and I want to show you the measure that we created. We created it in the sales table. And if I click in the sales table, this is called the calculation area. If I expand this column a little bit, it will show me the measure that we created, the revenue. And if I select it, here in the formula bar, you see the DAX function we created. I can also hide the calculation area if I wish. So if I click on calculation area button, I'm hiding the calculation area. One final thing, when I select this table, in the status bar, it shows me the number of records, a little close to 70,000 records. I can close the Power Pivot Data Model window, and I'm back to Excel. These are the 2 reports we created. We created the first one by using a huge number of VLOOKUP functions, and we created the second one by using relationships. And if you enjoyed this training video, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel and ring the bell to be notified when new tutorials are released. The best is yet to come. Thank you for watching and see you next time.